piece that will be valuable for today's discussion on manufacturing. I'd first like to welcome Chris Power from Hadrian, who serves as the company's Chief Executive Officer. Next, we have Zinger, Vergent, and currently serves as its Executive Chairman. Next, we have Austin Bishop, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the New American Industrial Alliance. And lastly, we have Adam Hirsch, who serves as a senior economist at the Economic Policy Institute. Thank you each for being here. And with that, I would ask everyone to stand. Not you. Okay, pursuant to the committee rule 9G, the witnesses will please stand and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that the witness is in the affirmative. You may. We appreciate you being here today. We look forward to your testimony. Let me remind you that we have read your written statement, and it will appear in full in the hearing record. Please limit your oral arguments to 5 minutes. It's very simple. The light in front of you will turn yellow when you have 1 minute left, and then when it's red, your time has expired. As a reminder, please press the button, and often people do not know to speak directly into the microphone. And so this is being covered on C-SPAN, and we want the American people to hear what you have to say. And with that, I recognize Mr. Power for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Bellinson and Ranking Member Frost and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear here today. I came to this country from Australia 5 years ago purely because I recognized that, as the chairman quite rightly said, we're past the end of history Fukuyama phase. And what we've done to the United States is deindustrialize the country over the last 40 years, some through our own mistakes and some through forcible Chinese policy, where they're using aggressive subsidies to pull out critical manufacturing capability from offshore. And what I recognized before I came here to make as big of an impact on the country as possible is that, you know, Americans treat manufacturing as a kind of globalism-free trade over the last 40 years, and China has quite rightly treated it as a strategic capability of being able to make things onshore. And the chairman was quite right in that what won World War II was our ability to pivot the commercial manufacturing base into the defense base when it really mattered. And over the last 40 years, we've offshored everything that wasn't bolted down to the defense industrial base by regulations like ITAR. So we're in a real crisis now. And the impact of that both the chairman and ranking member Frost were quite right, is that it decimated the middle class, it decimated the American manufacturing workforce, and culturally that means, you know, no one wants to work in manufacturing, because why would you sign up your son or daughter to go into an industry that's in declining? So we've created this real crisis for ourselves, and now that China is a real global threat, you know, we're in very much crisis mode. So I came here to make a difference in that, and I'll provide some specific recommendations. But in reality, what this is all about is the highly skilled American workforce. And for the last 40 years, because of those declining jobs, because the revenue has gone out of the country, there are less factories, there are less good jobs. And now we're at a point where most of the skilled American workforce is in their late 50s and early 60s. And by skilled, I mean incredibly highly skilled, especially in the defense industrial base. It normally takes 10 to 20 years to train someone. These are very highly paid jobs at defense primes or subcontractors to the defense primes that are critical to remain onshore. But because of that demographic load, you've got most of the workforce aging out across the next decade. As people get older and they tire, and we are losing their knowledge and skills with them, and we are forgetting as a country to manufacture, and it is all about the people on the ground floor that are getting the job day in, day out. And they are just retiring faster and faster and faster. So what my company does, Hadrian, we're the fastest growing manufacturer in the United States, is we build autonomous AI-driven factories where we're not replacing people, but we are making the American workforce 10 times more efficient so that we can compete globally while creating new and advanced jobs along the way. And the only way to reindustrialize this country is to leapfrog the Chinese system, which has been built on the back of slave labor conditions, enormous CCP policy-led energy subsidies, raw material subsidies, that are simply not a level playing field with American innovation. So what our company is built to do is build and rapidly scale United States factories that are software and robotics first, that do not replace people, but let them be 10 times more productive, and also simplify things so that 100% of our workforce now have never set foot inside a factory before they join our company. We can train them in 30 days in not 10 to 20 years. And what that means is that there's new types of jobs coming online that are higher paid, they're better, friendlier conditions, and it allows us to scale with the demand that the country needs, especially in critical areas like shipbuilding and munitions, where the number one problem that you'll hear from program officers or other actors in the shipbuilding space is, I simply cannot, you could give me $1 billion, I simply cannot hire enough welders. They no longer exist in the country. There simply aren't enough machinists or quality inspectors in the country. And the only way to do that to meet the national mission of both reindustrializing the country to compete globally in this new world order where we are disconnecting from the Chinese economy, and to meet the emerging needs of the defense industrial base, the only way to do that is build factories that give the American workforce superpowers and have them have better jobs, more highly paid jobs that are robotics and software first, and allow us to scale as a country by leapfrogging China with what America is best at. We still have global leadership in software, AI, and robotics, and the point of building these advanced factories is to give the American workforce superpowers so that we can scale as a country and compete globally without falling into the trap of low-paid jobs or simply giving up the farm and not being a manufacturing superpower anymore, which is critically important. There's two critical points that are in my testimony, but I would like to reinforce, given that the time is up. One is that much of our spend that is going to China is through defense primes or other manufacturers in the US that get paid by the federal government, but end up offshoring a big chunk of their supply chain. One thing that you would immediately create millions and millions of jobs and demand in the country is by forcing a statement that if you get paid in America, you must have your supply chain and make it in America without us subsidizing the competitive landscape. And the second thing that I'd like to encourage everyone to think about, whether it's a tariff policy or other policy, is that we have to create an even playing field with China. Our energy cost and our raw materials cost, not to mention labor subsidies, are 10 times greater than China. So to compete globally, we have to find strategic ways to give the American manufacturers a level playing field with the egregious CCP subsidies that get put on core inputs to manufacturing like energy and raw materials cost. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. And I think the yellow light turns on. We have 30 seconds left, so just as reference. I now recognize Mr. Zinger for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member and distinguished members of the committee for the opportunity to testify here today. I'm representing my company, Divergent, and I'm also here as someone who has spent a lifetime believing in America's capacity to lead. I grew up working class in Cleveland, an industrial city that once took great pride in helping power the American economy. Football helped me earn a college education as the first in my family to go to school, and I later served as a U.S. Marine Corps infantryman before becoming an inventor and technology entrepreneur. What drives me is the belief that this country, more than any other, has the ingenuity, the grit, and the values to lead the world in innovation and in actually creating things. I founded Divergent because I saw what happened to America's industrial core. We didn't just outsource jobs. We outsourced our key core national strength. We weakened our supply chains to save a buck in the short run, both in industry and in Silicon Valley. We ignored the needs of our workers and our communities. We gave China the lead, and through turning over our supply chain to them, we gave them in plain sight hidden control of our national security and our economic security. Now we need a fix. This can't be done through traditional incremental steps or going back to old technology. We must fundamentally rethink manufacturing and the factory itself. That's why Divergent was built from a clean sheet of paper. We started with what the future demands today. Divergent developed the world's first fully integrated digital industrial system by combining together in one system generative design, additive manufacturing, advanced materials, and robotics. We design, print, and assemble high-performance structures at industrial volumes faster and with greater flexibility than ever before in the history of the planet. It is today fully operational, proven across aerospace, defense, and automotive platforms, and it is entirely built and based here in the United States. We've proven the system at scale, delivering components for fighter jets, hypersonics, and space systems. We are currently working with every major U.S. defense prime and with some of the most demanding commercial auto companies in the world, including Aston Martin, McLaren, Mercedes, and Bugatti. These are production programs with cars out on the road today, with AI-designed 3D printed structures built here in the United States. These companies that I mentioned do not compromise on quality, safety, and precision. A depleted munitions stockpile, huge sustainment backlogs, and obsolete parts are plaguing the Defense Department. Divergent is ready to step in now and scale production with a scale-ready digital factory system. Faster, more resilient, and at a far lower cost to the taxpayer. Now think ahead, a nationwide network of next-generation American families across and can be in virtually every state of the union that don't just build resilience, they rebuild America's industry. This isn't one factory making one product. It's factories, each able to serve many industries, produce any parts, and support hundreds of companies across the country. That's what Divergent enables. That's how we upskill the American workforce. That's how we take jobs back from China and bring them back home under standards that uphold human rights and deliver good wages. This is about more than advanced technology. It's about responsibility and resilience. It's about rebuilding an industrial base that is accountable to the nation it serves, because we've seen what happens when fragile global supply chains break, whether in a pandemic or in war. After the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, President Kennedy went to Dr. von Braun, then the space director of NASA, and asked how the U.S. could catch up. Wernher von Braun said, "Mr. President, we won't catch up to them in Earth orbit. We need to beat them to the moon." The good news is, in the last decade, we've done that moonshot, and we now have a fully digital factory that is ready to scale. Divergent is proof of what is possible when innovation is unleashed. Now think about what we could achieve if we align policy, capital, and the will to accelerate this innovative transformation. This is our chance to reindustrialize with purpose. Let's not only play defense, let's play offense. Let's not only reshore manufacturing over the coming years, let's leapfrog China and disrupt them with proven technology. Let's lead again, and let's do it in a way that builds a more vibrant, secure, and equitable America. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Bishop for his opening statement.
Chairman Burleson, Ranking Member Frost, and the members of the committee, thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. We are at a pivotal moment in American history that demands urgency, imagination, and national unity. The question before us is not whether America can lead in the world in cutting-edge production again, but whether we choose to. So reindustrialization is not about nostalgia or recreating a past economy, but about building a dynamic, future-facing industrial base that strengthens national security, revives economic mobility for working Americans, and reclaims American leadership in critical sectors. This is a nonpartisan challenge and a once-in-a-generation opportunity. As Ranking Member said, workforce is at the front of this. I mean, I'm a guy from Cleveland, Ohio as well, and over the decades that I grew up there, and certainly the decades leading up to that, I wish that there was this much interest in ensuring that our industrial base stayed onshore. And what we saw over those few decades is something that we have a chance to reverse going into the future. You know, during COVID-19, that pandemic exposed a really painful truth, which is our over-reliance on globalized supply chains has left American families vulnerable and our economy brittle. Basic goods, from personal protective equipment to microchips, became scarce almost overnight. Moms in the Midwest couldn't get baby formula because the Suez Canal was blocked, an absurdity that everyone must admit reveals a massive weakness created by surrendering sovereignty over where and how things are produced. Resilience on far-flung manufacturing hubs, particularly in Asia, has caused a profound loss of confidence in our system's resilience. We are all worse off in a world where the West cannot manufacture certain goods in abundance. And that reality forces us to rely on the good graces of distant powers to meet our needs. It weakens our military's ability to deter aggression and to defend its allies, and deprives millions of Americans in every state of stable, high-productive employment in high-tech industries. Moreover, this vulnerability was not accidental. Deindustrialization was a choice resulting from bad policy decision and flawed ideologies that prioritized short-term cost savings over long-term national strength and discouraged investment in capital-intensive industries. Cheap labor abroad and foreign subsidization, combined with burdensome regulations and protracted permitting processes, has hollowed out our domestic manufacturing base. We socialized the cost and privatized the gains, as entire cities were reduced to rusty shells of their former selves while the S&P made record highs. We should remember that the pandemic is a warning shot. We cannot entrust our prosperity to fragile, distant supply chains. Further compounding this is the reality that China is an increasingly hostile geopolitical rival and sits at the center of many global supply chains. Today, the United States depends heavily on China for critical minerals, semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, ships. Everyone in this room knows this at this point. These supply chains could collapse overnight in the event of a conflict or even heightened tensions. We must be clear-eyed. Economic dependency is a strategic vulnerability. If we cannot produce the essentials of modern life within our own borders, we are not truly sovereign. Onshoring critical industries is not simply an economic imperative, but a national security mandate. Bringing manufacturing home is also not about reliving the past. It's about forging a better future. The future has to look like the future. I say this again as a guy whose city is maybe most famous for its rivers catching on fire. We are no fans of that. The old industrial jobs of the 20th century were the foundation of the American middle class, providing millions with good wages, dignity, and upward mobility. Since manufacturing's share of the GDP declined from 30% in the 1950s to just 11 or 12% today, we have witnessed the undeniable hollowing out of our middle class. However, manufacturing jobs of tomorrow will not look like the jobs of the past. They'll be extensions of the advanced manufacturing jobs that we already have here in America at companies like some of my colleagues here, highly skilled, technologically advanced careers working with robotics, precision manufacturing, AI logistics, and more. Onshore companies will also need workers for sales, construction, management, maintenance. This represents millions and millions of jobs, many of which do not require four-year degrees. By investing in a modern industrial base, we can rebuild a middle class that is not only larger, but is better equipped for the demands of the 21st century. Finally, onshoring manufacturing will ignite innovation across our economy. Historically, industrial leadership has been inseparable from technological leadership. When we manufacture, we invent. When we lose production capabilities, we lose the ability to innovate. Today, America lags in critical manufacturing R&D areas, from battery production to advanced materials to microfabrication. By bringing industry back home, we will secure our supply chains and unlock new frontiers of research, entrepreneurship, and invention. The average American will benefit far more from reliable access to goods in a healthy, more dynamic economy where workers share more directly in the nation's growth and prosperity. Finally, reindustrialization is not about going backwards. It's about moving America forwards. It's about making America safer, more prosperous, and more unified. It's about empowering the next generation of American workers with the tools to build a better future. Thank you again for the opportunity. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Hirsch for his opening statement.
Chair Burleson, Ranking Member Frost, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to talk with you today. My name is Adam Hirsch, and I'm a senior economist at the Economic Policy Institute, where I study trade, industrial policy, manufacturing, and the U.S.-China economic relationship. Today's hearing covers an important topic for legislators. Manufacturing is a special and economically critical activity, and I have to say I agree with most of what I've heard from my co-panelists here about the causes of its long-term decline. While we're having a timely discussion, the premise for this hearing is somewhat out of debate. out of date. The previous administration had already ignited a renaissance in key manufacturing industries. 2024 saw the highest U.S. manufacturing investment in our history. 2023 was the next highest year. This was achieved with an embrace of industrial policy that incentivized U.S. manufacturing and defended against unfair and mercantilist practices from our trading partners. Now, in less than 100 days, the current administration has squandered this progress with policymaking chaos, senseless cuts to critical and effective government programs and investments, and an indiscriminate, non-strategic approach to trade policy. Economic indicators now for the manufacturing sector outlook are hitting near or at their lowest levels in recorded history, and economic policy uncertainty is at its highest level ever. To be sure, industrial policies begun under President Biden left room for improvement, but President Trump is not doing this. He's not so much throwing the baby out with the bathwater as he is demolishing the entire bathroom. As a nation, this will leave us all poorer, more dependent on foreign technology leadership, and more exposed to supply chain disruptions. There is another way forward. It is not going back to the failed trade policies that brought us here, but it is also not continuing with the chaotic, indiscriminate, and non-strategic tariff policies we've seen for the past 3 months. Nor will we get there with corporate tax cuts and deregulation. The path forward is to recognize the emerging consensus in economics that industrial policy is both feasible and effective, and if we heed its recommendations for how and when it can succeed. I provide some detail of this in my written testimony. But I'll summarize here by saying the economy is rife with market failures that call for strong public sector interventions and scientific research and coordination of economic stakeholders. Research finds that public investments in science yield a return on investment of between 140 and 210%. To put it in comparison, the long-run average return for the S&P 500 is less than 10%. Public research complements and enhances private sector development. For example, my co-panelists here are no doubt impressive and even visionary entrepreneurs, but they stand on the shoulders of 3D printing technology that was developed by a government scientist in a public research center in Japan. In addition to research, policymakers should identify priority industries for economic and national security importance, analyze the unique webs of complementary investments required to succeed in those industries, and devise coordination strategies specific to each application. This is how China's BYD became the world's #1 electric vehicle manufacturer. They didn't do it by stealing U.S. technology. We don't have that technology here. Succeeding at industrial policy requires substantial state capacity, which the so-called Department of Government Efficiency is rapidly dismantling. When China began its economic reforms in the 1980s, it did not cut its bureaucracy. It ousted the political hacks and added millions more bureaucrats, scientists, engineers, management professionals. There is no successful implementation of industrial policy in world history where state capacity is in decline. Finally, let me talk about manufacturing jobs. These were not always good jobs. They only became good jobs when unionization achieved high density. As manufacturing unions have declined, so has manufacturing job quality. We will not restore manufacturing jobs to anything like the levels in America's economic heyday, but we can ensure that the jobs we create everywhere in the economy provide dignity and decent pay. Thank you. I look forward to our questions.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Perry from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes of questions.
I thank the chairman. Mr. Bishop, it's estimated that the U.S. has lost 3.7 million jobs since 2001, largely due to Chinese illegal trade practices. You know, they bypassed the trade rules, as you know, through shell companies, backdoor tactics. They steal protected American intellectual property, and then they use the products to undercut American sales. Since 1981, the U.S. federal government, that's what China does, right? But since 1981, our government has issued at least one manufacturing-related regulation per week since 1981. And that's a long list of regulations, which is, you know, quite honestly, it's played into China's hands, bringing our manufacturing to a standstill, which is what they love. Do you have any recommendations for where to start with onshore manufacturing deregulate? Like, where do we start? What's the highest priority? And then give us like a roadmap, if you have one, about how to deal with that.
Thank you for the question. I mean, to this point, I mean, just the example of BYD that just came up, they didn't steal the technology for sure, but they were able to leapfrog us over the last 5-6 years, literally because American ex-auto executives and consultants went over and gave them the playbook. I know this because I know a number of these ex-executives and these consultants. And one of the reasons that they're able to take ideas and then turn them into a reality a lot faster is on the regulatory front. To your point, I think one of the things that we should be aiming the highest at, and is certainly on everyone's mind right now, is NEPA regulation. And again, as I said, the town that I'm from had a lot of rivers catching on fire in the 1970s. I'm for sure no fan of that, but I think we are so far away from where the pendulum has swung from those days to where now we have law firms making hundreds of millions of dollars a year just doing NEPA compliance regulation. If I had one thing to focus on, I think it would be a more common sense regulatory regime that is modern and built for the century that we're in, rather than something that was built in the 1970s.
Well, as a person who's in the manufacturing business, I think on this committee, would like your specific recommendations on where to start, whether that's NEPA or something else, some things that are specific that plague us. Look, we got a lot of work to do, right? One a week since 1981. Obviously, have a lot of work to do, but we need to start with some kind of prioritization and then get after it. Mr. Power, China accounted for almost 15% of all U.S. imports in 2023. It's also the largest foreign supplier of critical technologies for the Department of Defense. Greg Hayes, the CEO of Raytheon, stated that it would be impossible for him to decouple from China due to the company's reliance on thousands of Chinese suppliers. Meanwhile, the Communist Party of China considers the United States of America and its businesses not strategic adversaries, not strategic competitors, but the enemy. What are the real-world implications as you see them for America's warfighting capabilities if we don't change course?
Thank you for the question, sir. In my opinion, we're on a 5 to 8 year clock with China threatening Taiwan. And in the current state of the vast majority of defense manufacturing, these supply chains are so intermingled with rare earth minerals that produce magnets.
Don't call them rare earth. They're not rare. They're critical, but they're not rare. There's plenty of them in this country. We're just not allowed to go get them, but carry on.
That is correct, sir. I appreciate the clarification. They are so intermingled that even, I'll give you a practical example, is there's some components on the F-35 program that the DoD gave an exception to so that I think it was a magnet, is in the Chinese supply chain. And it's not just one part, it's not like a class of things like magnets, it's all over the place. And yes, it will take time to decouple. It is not a trivial thing to do. But in my mind, the only thing to do is pass legislation that says if you're getting paid in America, you have to have your whole supply chain in America and let the economic system correct. Because at this point, they could shut off a lot of our critical programs, not to mention semiconductors, and we'd be flying completely blind, and we would simply not have the productive capacity to make it past the first 2 weeks of a conflict.
Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Frost for his 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really glad that my Republican colleagues want to continue the Democratic historic efforts to rebuild America's manufacturing sector and revitalize local economies, an effort that has led to the creation of over 700,000 manufacturing jobs during President Biden's term. But the goal is not simply just the quantity of jobs, but also the quality of these jobs as well. We have to be focused on creating manufacturing jobs and working conditions that allow workers to actually prosper and support their families. This includes rules for better worker safety, increases in OSHA inspections, an emphasis in prevailing wages when awarding federal funding, and working closely with organized labor. Mr. Hirsch, how does a unionized manufacturing workforce benefit workers and the manufacturing industry?
Thank you for the question. It benefits in several ways. Number one is it attracts a high-skilled workforce with good wages and good compensation, and it retains them so that they can accumulate skills on the job that get fed back into the production process. Number two is it gives the workers from the shop floor who understand the production process the ability to contribute and work with management in designing and more efficiencies and improving production, as well as on innovating in products.
And how does the unionized manufacturing workforce also benefit the people who buy their products and the people in the community as a whole?
Well, this is something that Henry Ford recognized when he started paying a living wage to his workers back at the turn of the previous century. He recognized that for workers and communities to be able to have the consumption to meet the growing production capacity of our economy, they needed to be paid a decent wage. So unions help provide that decent wage. When unions go away, the wages of manufacturing jobs decline. We have been adding manufacturing jobs, but on net, in large part, these are in parts of the country where labor standards are quite low and not very well enforced. So while manufacturing has been expanding, the quality of those jobs has been in decline. Essentially, we're creating American maquiladoras.
And union apprenticeships can also help us significantly boost manufacturing by helping provide us with the skilled and reliable workforce that's needed. Mr. Hirsch, what do these moves tell us about the quality of manufacturing jobs that Trump policies will create? And the moves I'm talking about are the fact that President Trump has tried to convince workers that his policies will be good for them, while at the same time working aggressively to attack collective bargaining rights and the agencies responsible for protecting worker health and safety.
Well, I think Commerce Secretary Lutnick has given us a clear vision of what these jobs will look like from the Trump administration. He says that Americans should be screwing little screws into iPhones. Now, these are not the jobs of the future that are going to make our country prosperous again.
The Trump administration also is working aggressively to strip Americans of their regulatory protections. This is a problem for all of us as industrial hazards go beyond the factory door and extend to surrounding communities as well. Without these protections in place and enforced, these hazards threaten our drinking water, the air we breathe, the food we eat, and the products we use. Some would have us believe that it's a zero-sum game, that you have to pick one or the other, zero regulation, rolling everything back, or regulation at the wazoo and no one can do anything. But I think with the use of course, technology and a skilled workforce and good workers, we're able to have a world where everybody can thrive. Mr. Hirsch, how do current regulatory protections keep manufacturing workers safe, not just at work, but when they're home as well?
These regulations exist for a reason, and often they're working so well that people have long forgotten the problems that they were put in place to solve. When we take them away, there are going to be problems again. And what they will do is shift the costs and the risks from the companies who are doing this to the workers, to the communities where production is happening, to the country as a whole and consumers. You know, people don't want to have polluted water and polluted air in their communities. They don't want their kids playing on a playground where there's toxic chemicals in the air. They don't want to go fishing where there's toxic chemicals in the water. So these regulations play an important role in preventing that. And the way we could be using tariff policy instead of this chaotic and indiscriminate approach, which is disrupting and causing so much uncertainty, is we could be using this to create a regime of high standards, whether it's for worker rights or whether it's for environmental protection, whether it's for stopping the pollution of carbon emissions, putting those costs back onto the goods that are being produced abroad without those protections.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I want to start, Mr. Zinger, during one of the previous witnesses' testimony, it was said that that the American manufacturing is standing on the shoulders of 3D printing that was developed by other governments in Japan. would you say that that's accurate, that you're standing on the shoulders of that technology?
Specifically as to what we do, our printing machine is not based on any Japanese patents. It's solely based on U.S. inventions, a U.S. supply chain, and is built within our factories in the U.S.
Thank you. Many critics argue that manufacturing simply can't return to the U.S. because we have high labor costs. From your perspective, what is the strongest counter-argument to that?
Strongest counter-argument is that right now we have European car makers that we are in a relatively high-cost labor market, California, shipping to Aston Martin and other companies. So Aston Martin, Bugatti, McLaren, Mercedes, and Porsche, these are customers of an American company with American workers shipping today. I think that is because American innovation can create tools for American workers that allow them to do things faster, better, and cheaper. And when that happens, then you create a competitive manufacturing infrastructure, which we absolutely can have, and we absolutely can rebuild our global manufacturing market share. But it has to be based on new leapfrog technology that exists today commercially.
Can you give us an insight as to the issues regarding supply chain? For example, the resources that you need. You have some objects in front of you that are printed with a type of aluminum. I think that the last aluminum smelter was in Southeast Missouri. It's no longer there in the United States. Is there any concerns about the core materials in that supply chain?
I'd say we have a variety of materials that range from aluminum alloys we develop to high-temp materials for hypersonic applications to high-strength materials for munitions. From the very start, and the company was founded about a decade ago, we wanted to make sure that we had a secure supply chain. So we use U.S. allied suppliers. What I would say is these are metal powders. That atomization process, there is no reason that with different areas in the United States that have cheap, abundant energy, such as natural gas, that we couldn't bring back atomization production of metal powders and scale that as we build advanced manufacturing. And that is something we absolutely can do and should do.
Mr. Power, we have had previous hearings on the situation with our energy infrastructure, and can you expound on what a company is, what's going through their process when they're deciding where to locate a facility, and how much does electricity costs and availability play into that?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. Energy costs and regulations related to energy are a huge part of where we decide to put new factories in the United States. Firstly, just for speed of building, you would be probably surprised at how hard we could build a factory faster than we could get the permits to rig up electricity to it in certain states, which is a huge barrier to speed and pace, especially in the United States. And energy costs are such a huge part of our cost base that, compared to China, I think our energy cost is 10 to 20 times without subsidies. And the second point I'd make on energy costs is 95% of the cost of aluminum, as an example, is actually the cost of energy. So having energy too cheap to meter in the United States is not just helpful for running factories and having energy grids that can scale with all these advanced factories, but also for the raw material costs and inputs that are being passed on to our customers. So I think it's incredibly important, and strength of the grid, clean power, and then the cheapness and scalability of that power really drive a lot of the decisions of where we put factories, where we put data centers, and any advanced facility going into the American states.
Thank you. I yield back, and I now recognize Mr. Khanna from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Power, I appreciated your testimony and your focus on innovation, your focus on stabilizing demand, on building capacity. I noticed, even though you're here as a Republican called witness, there was a word missing in your testimony, the beautiful word of tariffs. I assume by that omission, you don't think that President Trump's tariff strategy is working in building advanced manufacturing here.
Thank you for the question, Congressman. We're not really impacted by tariffs, and it's hard for me to comment on it directly in this hearing because our entire supply chain is regulated, that we have to have everything from raw materials and everything onshore. So for United States companies that serve the defense market, we don't really buy anything offshore, and it's hard for me to comment
Now,
directly.
Mr. Power, you're certainly a thoughtful person. I mean, if the president asked you, do you think his tariff policy is working to bring advanced manufacturing in the United States, would you answer yes or no?
I think we're starting to see countries come to the table and negotiate, but my perspective is purely China-focused. So
But do you think, if you think his policy is working in terms of the way he's implemented the tariff policies?
I think we're going to start to see tariffs work over the next 90 to 100 days as things settle down.
You support his tariff policy?
I think tariff policy that means China cannot hide manufactured goods going through other countries.
I'm not asking you theoretically. I'm saying the way the president's gone about the tariff policy. Do you support it or not?
Yes, largely I support tariff
Mr.
policies
Kissinger,
to
do you- do
reassure
you
United States
support
manufacturing.
Trump's tariff policies?
Yes.
Mr. Kissinger, do you support Trump's tariff policies? Mr. Kissinger? Do you support Trump's tariff policies as he's implemented it?
I am not an expert on tariff policies, and
You're a
I would tell you,
Do you-
I am an
do you
expert,
support-
if I may
do you-
finish.
You know,
or-
I noticed none
Okay.
of the Republican witnesses mentioned tariffs, the beautiful word tariffs. Here he is on a manufacturing industrial policy. The three Republican experts are recommending everything but tariffs. Everything but tariffs. Your testimony didn't have tariffs, correct?
I am an expert
Did your
on enabling
did your-
advanced manufacturing
Did your
scale-up in the United
testimony have
States
any
and not on
word of
tariffs.
tariff in it, your opening testimony?
Of course not. I didn't come to testify on
Mr. Power,
tariffs.
did your testimony have any word tariff in it?
No, sir. We're asked to testify on
Mr.
bringing
Bishop,
advanced
did your-
manufacturers back to the United
Did your testimony
States.
have anything to say with tariffs in it?
No.
So the three Republican witnesses come to a hearing on industrial policy, and none of them mentioned the word tariff, not one single one. And yet all Donald Trump is doing is tariff policy when the three Republican witnesses are recommending 100 different things other than tariff policy. Mr. Bishop, do you agree with Donald Trump's tariff policy?
I'm not here as an economic expert.
You're all saying you're not here as an economic expert, and yet you're giving us all these recommendations for how we build an industrial base. Is it that you don't have any expertise and we should just pick up any random citizen, or are you here as some economic expertise on industrial policy?
Is that for me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I misspoke on this. I mean, on tariffs, this is just not one of the, I mean, like these guys as well, we're focused on building companies here.
But I don't understand how
And there
you
is a-
don't have the President of the United States is saying the way to build manufacturing is to have these tariff policies. You're here to testify on manufacturing, how we're going to build it. And you're telling me you don't have an opinion on whether the Trump tariff policy is successful or not?
We're here to represent private industry, people who are actually building companies, not people who are theoretical.
This is not a theoretical matter. He's implemented tariffs. I'm not even trying to trick you. I'm saying, do you agree with all his tariff policies, or do you disagree with them? Or are you so afraid that you don't know what to say?
I think all of us have been really clear. We're here to, this is not what we're here to talk about.
But do you agree with it or disagree with it? Yes or no? I mean, you could say either things.
I have the same position as these guys. We're here to
Which
talk
is-
about how to incentivize more manufacturing and industrial
Right, but do you
jobs.
think that the president's tariff policies are doing that or not?
I think it's a mix. I think what you're,
It's
as
a
Chris
mix. So
said.
some of it is correct and some of it is wrong?
Well, what-
You think some of Trump's tariff policies haven't worked?
No, I'm saying I agree with actually what Chris was saying, is that what we've seen so far has been, and what we're going to be seeing over the next 90 to 100 days has been really interesting, especially as more countries are coming back to the table. But I can't tell the
All three
future.
of you are so afraid of criticizing Donald Trump that even though you don't mention tariffs in any of your testimonies, none of you are willing to say that this policy is totally backfiring.
I just don't want to try to predict the near future. I'm not a mind reader. I don't know what's going on in the minds of the counterparties in other countries, and I think this is an inappropriate place to be asked.
Inappropriate to ask you about tariff policy in a manufacturing hearing when that's the president's policy? Anyway, my time has expired.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Donalds from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I'm in committee at the opportune time. Look, this is a great hearing about bringing manufacturing stock back to the United States. At the end of World War II, about 40% of the world's manufacturing capacity was here in America. Today, depending on who you ask, maybe around 15%, maybe lower, maybe a little bit higher. I would ask all three of the witnesses, actually I'll ask you too, Mr. Hirsch, what has actually been the #1 driver for a lack of manufacturing capacity in the United States since World War II? Mr. Power.
Thank you for the question, sir. In my mind, it is specific CCP policies that have artificially subsidized well past the cost of good jobs and competitive labor in America, where, if you'll remember, there was a large language model like DeepSeek that got released by China, and they're charging, 1/100th of a use case versus OpenAI. And they're doing that to draw the consumer into using that product more and more and more, which obviously then captures data. It is the same sort of industrial policy that has been going on for the last 40 years, where we could buy a block of raw material in the United States of aluminum, and it will be twice as expensive as the fully landed cost, including shipping, of that same component from China. And it is not possible for them to be so cheap and competitive, apart from the slave labor conditions, because they aggressively subsidize energy, raw materials, and kind of reverse tariffs, where if I sell something to you from China to the US, I get a subsidy back from the CCP. It is a strategic policy that has pulled manufacturing out of the United States for the last 40 years, and it's been done very intentionally. So it is artificial, anti-competitive subsidies that have pulled that cost base out of the United States and therefore destroyed millions and millions of American jobs, is my opinion on the one core reason.
Mr. Zinger, if you choose to add or bring your own knowledge.
Yeah, I'll add something briefly, which is if you look at 2000, China had a 7% global manufacturing market share in 2000. That was a brief 25 years ago. With WTO, I'd say two things. Going to what Mr. Power said, we did not enforce any of these violations by China after we gave them most favored nation status. And obviously, they understand that national security is directly connected, and being a world power is directly connected to global manufacturing market share. And they went about using a set of policies to capture that. At the same time, I would say driven primarily by some of our large technology companies, we started to outsource manufacturing to companies like Foxconn. So if you look at the actual kind of Industry 4.0 scale up of automated CNC machining, computer numerically controlled machining, between, I'd say, 2006 and 2016, you saw Apple pour $100 billion plus into Foxconn, a China-based contract manufacturing company. And they went from a couple hundred CNC machines to 150,000 automated lights out by 2016. Those two things, allowing people to cheat and undermine you from a national strategy, global strategy standpoint, and then having our process IP from our most advanced and process IP relating to manufacturing from our most advanced companies offshored to contract manufacturers and building that contract manufacturing industry around Foxconn and other contract manufacturers. That's what drove it.
Thank you, Mr. Zinger. Mr. Bishop.
Just to echo what both of my colleagues here have said, I mean, especially if you drill into the supply chains that go into the DoD right now, and the massive permissive use of waivers to, I mean, there are already plenty of rules in place that would, in theory, disallow everything from electronic components to just basic machine parts that go into all of the crucial material and devices that our warfighters use. And the reality is just the massive rampant use of waivers has been a huge problem. And when you actually go and drill down into that supply chain, you're finding not only direct links to China, which are the easy ones to find, but this huge web of shell companies and shell relationships between shell companies that effectively allow China to have first of all, a huge supply chain risk directly in the DoD and anywhere wherever we want to project power.
Well, gentlemen, Mr. Hirsch, I'm sorry. 5 minutes goes fast in this town. I appreciate that. I think it's important for the committee to recognize that, while the goal overall is to bring manufacturing back to the United States in as much of a capacity we can, either onshore or near shore, one thing is crystal clear. We have not been minding the store in the United States when it comes to trade policy writ large, especially when it comes to enforcement of trade policy. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Min from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank you for bringing this hearing forward. I also share the panelists' concerns around China and the threat that they pose to our economy. Also share the desire of everyone speaking today to bring back manufacturing to the United States. And I represent a district that does not have a lot of manufacturing, but I wanted to start, but obviously it's important for our economy. I wanted to start here by just following up on the comments of Mr. Khanna. I note that all of you up there, the Republican side, said you're not economists. I wanted to give Dr. Hirsch, an economist, a chance to weigh in as well to follow up on Mr. Khanna's questions.
Yeah, I guess I'm the only one up here who supports tariffs in theory. When a tariff is targeted and strategic, it can be an effective tool for supporting industrial development. But what we're seeing under President Trump's policy is the opposite of that. It's broad-based, it's indiscriminate, it's non-strategic. It's going to be a disaster.
Yeah, and so I guess what you're saying, if I can summarize, is that tariffs can be a tool to address some of the strategic and uncompetitive behavior we're seeing out of places like China, but not when they're applied in such a blanket and haphazard way as we're seeing right now.
Absolutely, and we've seen that just in the past week or so with a determination on shipbuilding, on solar panels. We saw President Biden invoke a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles. These are all things that will contribute to rebuilding manufacturing, including the steel and aluminum tariffs of Mr. President, of Mr. Trump. Which helped keep that smelter, which Chair Burlinson referenced, online for much longer than it could have been.
So I want to follow up by noting that the view you share, that you expressed now, is shared by many other. In fact, I would say it's a consensus view among economists, and I know the other three are not economists. You're very careful to say you're not economists and have no views on the strategic effectiveness of these tariffs, but I just want to quote Jerome Powell, who said a few weeks back that the Trump tariffs are likely to cause, quote, higher inflation and slower growth. Janet Yellen, former Secretary of the Treasury, described Trump's tariffs as, quote, the worst self-inflicted wound that I've ever seen an administration impose on a well-functioning company. I also want to bring it back to a company in my district that does do some manufacturing. They do electronics manufacturing. And one of the things that I didn't hear any of you talk about is the way that the global supply chain is constructed these days. That a lot of the manufacturing that takes place in the United States is dependent on parts and repair improvements made cross-border. So the gentleman I'm describing here who spoke at a roundtable we had talked about how his goods are typically adjusted or improved in Mexico, maybe in Singapore. They come back to the United States. They cross the border many times. Each time, they're potentially subject to a tariff. That is, the aggregate of that is going to have huge impacts. He described this as something that is an existential threat to his business, the tariffs that Trump has proposed. Mr. Hirsch, do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, so nothing is 100% made in America. Across the U.S. manufacturing, about 45% of the value added comes from imported content. We can't just rip that out at the roots. We have to have a strategic approach to gradually replace that without disrupting the businesses that are already operating. And when we put 145% tariff on China without that strategic approach in place, then foreign competitors in manufacturing can access all those intermediate inputs without paying a tariff, is putting U.S. manufacturers at a disadvantage.
Yep. I'll just close by noting that I was just in a congressional delegation a couple weeks back to Korea, and we met with a number of the chaebol out there, Hyundai, LG, Hanwha. A number of them have actually committed billions, hundreds of billions of dollars to manufacturing in the United States, following Trump 1 to try to build out manufacturing capacity here in the United States, but also in response to clear incentives. And we talk about a stick and carrot approach. I think we can characterize Trump's tariffs as a big, massive stick that's going to club every economy in the world. We had the carrots approach from the Biden administration with things like the clean energy tax credits to incentivize solar, EVs, et cetera, the CHIPS Act, which is starting to bring semiconductors back. And I will just tell you and share with you that these companies were very concerned about the tariffs policies, but also very concerned that the Trump administration would pull back on some of these tax incentives and other incentives that actually made manufacturing pencil out in the United States. What are your views, and I'll ask this quickly of the panel, Mr. Power, Mr. Singer, Mr. Bishop, Mr. Hirsch, on these programs that actually seem to bring manufacturing back to the United States?
Whether it's a carrot or stick policy or regulations that make it easier to produce American jobs, I support both sides, whether it's carrot or the stick. To just
you
ensure.
support those, keeping those programs in place?
Which program, sorry, sir?
The Clean Energy Tax Credits, the CHIPS Act, some of the IRA incentives that have seemed to bring manufacturing back?
Yeah, CHIPS Act was a great bipartisan legislation that was designed to bring massive semiconductor, which is such a critical piece of the supply chain.
I think I'm out of time, so Mr. Singer.
I would agree with the comment on the CHIPS Act.
What about the Clean Energy Tax Credits?
I would have to look at them in more depth to be able to give
Mr.
you
Bishop.
a reasonable answer.
We support all of the above. We're trying to incentivize more jobs here and more innovation.
Thank you for that answer. Mr. Hirsch?
Pulling back on these policies now risks stranding hundreds of billions of dollars in investments and jobs. And I'll say, my co-panelists have talked about the issue of energy costs. Just in the past 3 months, $8 billion of new energy projects supporting 8,000 jobs have been canceled.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Higgins from Louisiana for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bishop, from your perspective, what happens to the sovereignty of a nation when it loses its industrial base?
Well, that's a softball question, I feel like. I mean, it is, and I appreciate it
It's
because
set up for a hard question.
I imagine. No, and I'm slightly joking because you would think it'd be an obvious answer, but it seems
One
like
would think.
over many decades, no one has taken this as a softball question. It has either not taken it seriously or has come to the wrong conclusion.
So
which
clearly you concur that the sovereignty of a powerful nation will gradually disintegrate with the gradual loss of its industrial base.
you cannot have one without the other.
And not have one without the other. There you go. So the loss of American industrial base largely to China. Let's talk about China. Would you concur that there's been some perceived price advantage for products on the shelves, that this has been a foundational, driving factor? Setting aside the details, basically people want more stuff and cheaper stuff, right?
It's certainly been the driving narrative.
Clearly. So the price advantage, is that the result of the price advantage from goods manufactured in China and transported across the ocean to ends up on American shelves? That price advantage, in some way, is that price advantage the result of some combination of subsidized endeavors from communists, child labor, and slave labor?
All of the above.
All of the above. So there you go, America. I want you to think about this, please, as a child of God, as a compassionate human being. Do you really want a cheaper product on the shelf that's been subsidized by communists and produced with child labor and slave labor? This is what the Trump administration and some conservatives in Congress are pushing back against. We seek to establish the truth that cheap products produced in abhorrent conditions on foreign soil, subsidized by communism, and produced by child labor and slave labor, not only should they not be available for a cheaper price on our shelf, they shouldn't be available at all on American shelves, in the opinion of some. So we not only support the aggressive effort of our executive branch to push back against this worldwide, but particularly with China, we not only support it, we demand it. And some of us, I'm 63 years old. I've watched our industrial base disintegrate in my lifetime. And what we hope, and I'm going to ask you, Mr. Bishop, to address what this means for the next generation. I am prayerful that we can fix this thing in this Congress, at least change the trajectory of trade imbalance by insisting upon core principled trade deals with nations like China. And we have to be aggressive about it for the coming generation. Mr. Bishop, how would you see, if we fix this thing, what happens for the next generation of Americans if we restore the industrial base of our sovereign nation?
It's a golden era. I mean, you look at where the cities where we used to produce things, St. Louis, Cleveland, Pittsburgh. I mean, these were some of the richest cities, not just in the country, but in the entire world. We literally called it a gilded era. And what's happened over the last century, and it's certainly accelerated over the last 2 decades, is something that's reversible, but we have to get very, very serious about it.
Do you believe a new golden era has been described, is achievable, good sir, if we make the necessary corrections now?
We still have time, but in my opinion, we have to get really serious right now.
Well, Mr. Chairman, we are really serious right now. Thank you for convening this hearing, and I yield.
The gentleman yields. I submit for the record a document from the National Association of Manufacturers giving recommendations for how to improve the manufacturing in the United States. Without objection. So ruled. And I now recognize Mr. Frost for his closing statement.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses again for coming to share your expertise on a very important subject, ensuring that we continue the manufacturing boom we saw under the Biden administration into the future. Like I said, this is about, of course, the quantity of jobs, but also the quality of these jobs. But I also have to bring up something that one of my colleagues, Representative Khanna, had brought up, and it has to do with the tariffs policy. And while advanced manufacturing create jobs, that number of jobs will pale in comparison to the negative impact of Trump's tariffs. Tariffs are a tax on all consumers. They put the heaviest burden of that tax on middle and working class Americans. You're shaking your head. No, one of the witnesses is shaking his head no, but we just went through this, and you all conceded that you know nothing about tariffs and have nothing to say about it. Tariffs will result in greater unemployment as well. I have 3 unanimous consent requests. The first one is an article from CNBC from April 7th, 2025, entitled, "This is a Trump Recession. CEO says with tariff price increases, job losses coming."
Without objection.
The other one is an article from The Independent, April 22nd, 2025, entitled "Trump Tariffs Driving Thousands of Layoffs at U.S. Manufacturing Plants."
Without objection.
The third one is a report from the Center for American Progress from April 10th, entitled "Trump Tariffs Pause Doesn't Pause Economic Pain, Will Cost Families $4,600 a Year."
Without objection.
This is important. I appreciate the nuance and a lot of the ideas we heard from all of our panelists that were brought up today. But if you were to ask the president what he's doing to bring back U.S. manufacturing, he would tell you to look at his tariff policy. And so it being brought up here, I think, was completely germane to the subject at hand. And hopefully next time we can dive into that as well. Thank you so much, and I yield back to the chair.
Thank you. Now, in my closing statement, again, thank you, witnesses, for coming today. Today's testimony has made one thing clear to me, something that I did not have before, which is hope. Mr. Power, Mr. Zinger, Mr. Bishop, what the efforts that you guys are working on gives me a level of hope. U.S. manufacturers stand ready to expand production here in the U.S., hire American workers, and bring critical manufacturing capabilities back onshore. Financial backers of manufacturing, moreover, are not waiting for a miracle. They've been waiting for a signal, and now they have it from President Trump, from Congress, and from the American people, that the U.S. is serious about rebuilding our once great manufacturing prowess. Americans want to produce here in America. They're willing to buy products made here. The demand is not just patriotic, it's economic, strategic, and it's cultural. It's about security, self-reliance, and, yes, national pride. Reviving American industry is not just an economic goal, it's a national imperative. Industrial strength built this country. It won our wars. It fueled our prosperity and lifted generations out of poverty and into the middle class. And we can do it again. American factories can roar again. Let us seize this moment, not just to restore what was lost, but to build something even greater. Let us make American manufacturing not just a memory of the past, but the backbone of our future. Reindustrializing will make America great again, and we should all strive to help make that happen. Again, thank you for your time today. And with that, without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials and to submit additional written questions for the witnesses, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for the responses. And if there is no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.